Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the 30th video for the Old Testament Survey course. We're still working through the poetic books, and in this section, we'll look at the book of Proverbs. As usual, we'll start with some background issues. The first topic is the author of Proverbs. The very first verse says, "It is the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel." And Solomon was famous for his wisdom, including writing Proverbs. So much of this book comes from Solomon. However, other sections are called sayings of the wise. And chapter 25, verse 1 says that these proverbs were edited together in King Hezekiah's time. And there are final collections of many sayings from other authors, such as Agur and Lemuel. So Solomon is the author of a large portion of this book, but not the final author. Like Psalms, Proverbs is a collection from multiple authors edited together. And the date of this book is from the time of the monarchy. Obviously, some was written during the reign of Solomon, and it was edited together in Hezekiah's time, and possibly other parts were added later. Now, let's look at the organization of this book. The major outline of this book is fairly clear, but some of the details are disputed. The book starts with 7 verses that act as a preamble. This section describes the purpose for the book in detail, and the rest of the first 9 chapters is the prologue. This section also gives a more detailed introduction to the book, and it's made of larger organized sections. There are 10 lessons from a father to his son, encouraging the son to pursue wisdom. And this describes 2 ways, 2 destinies, and 2 voices. There are 2 ways to live, the way of the wise and the way of the fool. And there are 2 destinies that result from the 2 ways, classic Deuteronomistic theology. And there are 2 voices that call out for our attention, one that counsels wisdom and righteousness, and one that tempts to wickedness and folly. And therefore, we should listen to the voice of wisdom and ignore the temptation to foolishness. Then, the main body of the book contains seemingly unorganized single sayings. Typically, one proverb doesn't seem to show any obvious connection to the next one. They're like a salad tossed together in seemingly random order, but they are clearly labeled into larger collections. There are 2 sections of the Proverbs of Solomon and 2 sections of the sayings of the wise. And then there are some final collections at the end of the book, including sayings of Agur and King Lemuel and the poem on the virtuous woman. Now let's look at the content of Proverbs, starting with some key verses. First is Proverbs 1, verses 1 through 7. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Now, this passage is the entire preamble of the book, and as such, it gives the reason for the book, so that the reader may attain wisdom, understanding, and discretion in order to live a successful life that prospers in all godliness. And this passage contains the theme verse for the whole book, that the fear of the Lord is the major part of wisdom. Now, some say that the book of Proverbs is fairly secular, approaching life without God. But this verse proves that God, the Torah, and the covenant are all at the heart of all the wisdom books and what it means to be truly wise. Next is chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, and if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, And if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of Yahweh and find the knowledge of God. This passage is an invitation to the reader to pursue wisdom, and we're to do so with a zeal and diligence like we are searching for treasure. And it promises that the benefits will be worth the effort. Then is chapter 4, verses 5 through 8, verse 13 and 23, saying, "Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or swerve from them. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. Wisdom is supreme, therefore get wisdom. Though it costs all you have, get understanding. Esteem her, and she will exalt you. Embrace her, and she will honor you. Hold on to instruction. Do not let it go. Guard it well, for it is your life. Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life." Now, all these verses are different ways of saying the same general thing. They are commands to get wisdom, no matter the cost. And once wisdom is attained, it needs to be preserved and guarded against deception and temptation. The reader of Proverbs is counseled that wisdom is absolutely indispensable for life. Next is chapter 8, verses 1 through 5, which says, "Does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights along the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gate leading into the city, at the entrances she cries aloud. To you, O men, I call out. I raise my voice to all mankind. You who are simple, gain prudence. You who are foolish, gain understanding." In this passage, wisdom is personified as a woman calling out to all who will hear and inviting them to learn wisdom from her. And this is contrasted with the harlot Folly, who is tempting the reader to a foolish, sinful life. And finally is chapter 9, verses 10 through 12. "The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For through me your days will be many, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise, your wisdom will reward you. If you are a mocker, you alone will suffer." This passage also emphasizes the fear of the Lord as key to wisdom and success in life, and it reiterates Deuteronomistic theology. If you're wise, you'll be rewarded. If you're foolish, you will suffer. These are some of the key ideas of the book of Proverbs. Now, you may have noticed that all of the key verses were from the preamble and prologue, and that is because these first two sections introduce and summarize the rest of the book. And the rest of the book is an elaboration of the two ways and an application on specific issues and ways to live out wisdom. So the rest of the content is specific examples of wisdom and living it out through individual proverbs. So we're going to look at the rest of the content by looking more deeply at the nature of biblical wisdom and the nature of a proverb. First, what is wisdom? Now, there are two ideas that I want us to look at in order to understand the nature of biblical wisdom in the book of Proverbs. First, wisdom is skill. The root meaning of the Hebrew word for wisdom is skill. It is somewhat of a general word, and it begs the question, skill in what? Well, wisdom is skill in applying the Torah and the prophets. You see, knowing these is not enough if you do not rightly put them into practice. Remember Job's friends and the Pharisees in the New Testament. They knew the right ideas, but they were not wise because they did not live it out rightly. And wisdom is skill in applying the Torah and prophets to all of life. Wisdom in the book of Proverbs applies to a wide range of topics, and this includes money, talks about wealth and poverty, motivation, talks about work and sloth, relationships, talks about sex, your neighbor, family, talks about speech, truth, lying, mocking, gossip, proper instruction, and rebuke. And wisdom, how to find and apply wisdom. And attitudes like envy and spite, or hope and joy, etc. Wisdom is applying the Torah and the prophets to life choices, because life is made up of many little choices. And Proverbs says there are basically only two choices. You will either be wise or foolish. You will either be righteous or wicked. And Proverbs talks about advanced choices. That is, choices made in advance of when they are needed. Choose now how you will act tomorrow. Train yourself now for how you want to live and act in a crucial situation. Build habits and disciplines now, and they will serve you well in the future.
These are the years when a man changes into the man he's going to become the rest of his life. Just be careful who you change into.
You see, nobody just accidentally slides into wisdom. You have to pursue it. And by the way, this is not legalism. It is not all up to us. God gives grace, and it's all because of his grace. God gives wisdom and teaches us wisdom by his word. God gives growth, but we need to plant and water. And wisdom is applying the Torah and the prophets to moral and ethical and religious choices. In some ways, the book of Proverbs might seem almost secular because it talks about everyday things that are often dealt with without reference to God in our culture. But this wisdom in Proverbs is profoundly God-centered. Therefore, it is illegitimate to think of Proverbs as keys to successful life without also being convinced that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In other words, you cannot have true wisdom without profound reverence for God, as we'll see in a minute. Wisdom is applying the Torah and the prophets by being thought-provoking. In other words, biblical wisdom is not asking for blind, dumb obedience, but it invites us to a thoughtful wrestling with the issues. Just one example, Proverbs 21:9 says, "It is better to live on a corner of the roof than to share a house with a quarrelsome wife." Now, let's think about this for a minute. Where I live, it can be very cold and rain or snow for a large part of the year. Imagine how miserable it would be to be confined to a small portion of the roof. And Proverbs tells us that that's better than living inside a warm, spacious house with a quarrelsome wife. So doesn't that make any unmarried reader want to be extra careful in choosing whom they will marry? The Proverbs draw us in by concrete illustrations and makes us think through the implications of our choices and plan accordingly. And that's just one example of the kind of thing that wisdom teaches for a successful life. So, wisdom is skill in applying God's instruction to every part of life. And the second major idea of biblical wisdom is that it is seeing all of life from a God-centered perspective. Let me start by contrasting this with what the Bible says about a fool. The Bible says that the fool says in his heart, there is no God. In other words, the fool places himself at the center of his life, and God has no part in it. Some would believe that God doesn't in fact exist, or others might believe that he exists, but believe he is distant or irrelevant to everyday life. For the fool, God is not in the picture, and that is certainly not biblical wisdom. But let me give you one more bad example to explain by contrast. There are many unwise people who believe in God and even claim that he has a part in their life, but they relegate God to a supporting role, a bit part on the margins, who only comes into the picture when he's called. That kind of person still considers themselves to be in the center of their life. God might be in the picture, but he's in the periphery. They think of him like a butler who only comes when he's called. And every thought and decision is still focused on the individual person as the defining point and goal of their reality. They may say they believe in God, but practically they live much of life as if he didn't exist. They live for themselves, and God is a mere afterthought. That's not wisdom. Now, by contrast, biblical wisdom is putting God at the center and realizing that it's all about him. This is wise because this is reality. God is the most important person in this universe, and we are all supporting characters in his story. We are wise to the extent that we know this and live in light of it. When we consider God and his ways and purposes above our own, when all of our activities and relationships are mediated through Christ, when our goals and passions and character and authority are intentionally conformed to his, that is wisdom. Now, I know this is difficult and unnatural because we are born with innate selfishness and sinfulness, but the good news and message of Proverbs is that we can grow in wisdom. And the more God-centered our heart and life is, the more we are living in biblical wisdom and in what the New Testament calls sanctification. Therefore, we should ask, how can I involve God in every decision and relationship? How can the Lord be honored in my workplace? How do my entertainment and recreation choices reflect Jesus? How is God present? And how can I make him central in all of my life? This kind of attitude will lead us into biblical wisdom, and Proverbs provides great help in this. Now, I hope this has given you a better understanding of true biblical wisdom and motivated you to pursue it in your own life. So now, let's address the question, what is a proverb? Well, a proverb is a compact statement of a general truth. It comes from thoughtful, wise observation. It is then put in concise, memorable form. Some modern examples are look before you leap, better dead than red, etc. It is truth compacted into easy-to-carry form. It is important to realize that a proverb is not exactly the same as a promise. Because it is short and memorable, it is not precise to the level of a guarantee. For example, I could say, study hard and you'll pass the test. And that's true as long as you study the right material, as long as you get a good night's sleep, and many other variables. So studying hard will help you pass the exam, all other things being equal. But it doesn't promise that no other issues will interfere. And that's why we need to be careful how we quote and apply Proverbs. For example, Proverbs 22:6 says, train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Now, this is true, and parents should be conscientious in the way that they train their children. However, there are many other factors that influence any child, and children make their own choices. The parents do have a strong influence, and this proverb should be taken seriously, but they are not the only influence. So if a kid goes bad, be careful not to use this verse to blame the parents without good evidence, because there might be more going on. And it's also important to realize that a proverb is not exactly the same as a command. It takes wisdom to know how and when to apply Proverbs. For example, Proverbs 26:4 says, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself. But the very next verse says, answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. Now, this means that there are certain times when we should not answer a fool, because if we do, we will lower ourselves to his level. But other times, we need to answer a fool so that he does not think that he is right, and so that his falsehood does not go unchallenged and deceive other people. But it takes wisdom and prayer to know when either response is more appropriate, especially in this age of social media. And every proverb demands that we exercise thoughtfulness and wisdom to determine if, when, and how to put it into practice, because they are not blanket commands for every occasion. Now, one last question I want to address is, how can we best read and learn from Proverbs? Well, there is much more to this question than I can answer in this section. This will be covered in a different course, but I will give you 3 principles that I hope are helpful. First, read Proverbs in light of their parallelism, as covered in the earlier section. Let the 2 or more parallel lines inform one another. Compare the 2 and read them together for the whole message. Second, compare each proverb with other proverbs on the same topic. For instance, if you read only one proverb about money, you may conclude that the reason someone is poor is that they are lazy. Or if you read only a certain different proverb on money, you might conclude that the reason someone is poor is that they are oppressed. And both might be true, but you should read both of these proverbs and many more on the subject of money to see that the situation is sometimes more complex than either of these individual proverbs. And then you can use wisdom to discern within the entire teaching of the book of Proverbs and apply what is most appropriate to a particular situation, and not just pick and choose one or another idea and try to apply it to every situation. And finally, read Proverbs slowly and ponder the life implications. When reading historical books, for instance, it is appropriate to read entire chapters or more at a time. But when reading Proverbs, it is more appropriate to read one verse and then stop and think about it. Ponder the implications and how it can apply to your life. Chew on it for a while until you get it. Now, let's look at the theological themes of the book of Proverbs. The first theme is wisdom. And I hope this does not shock anyone that this is a major theme of the book of Proverbs. This book is about attaining wisdom and living the wise life, as opposed to the foolish life. And it is about reaping the rewards of living a wise life, as I tried to explain earlier. The second theme is the fear of the Lord. This awe and respect, and yes, even fear of God, is the key to all true wisdom. It is the beginning of wisdom, not in the sense of the very first step that you then leave behind, but it is the beginning of wisdom in the sense of being the foundation upon which all other wisdom must be built. Because all the world conforms to God's moral ways, because he is creator and king and the ultimate judge. And therefore, we must conform to God or suffer the consequences in this life and in the next. Now, speaking of God's moral ways, the third theme of Proverbs is the 2 ways. That is, the way of the wise or the way of the fool, the way of the righteous and the way of the wicked. These are the only 2 possibilities in Proverbs. We are either for God or against him. There is no neutral ground. If we do not pursue the way of wisdom, we will drift into the way of folly. And Proverbs is very clear that the way of wisdom ends in blessing and prosperity, and the way of folly ends in disaster and regret. And that leads us to the fourth theme, which is, you might have guessed, Deuteronomistic theology. This is clearly taught and elaborated in the book of Proverbs, and I hope you recognize it by now. But notice also that, like in Job, it is not always immediate or simple, but sometimes it is complex and nuanced. And we need wisdom, and we need intentional and prayerful thoughtfulness to properly put it into practice. Now, these are the main theological themes of the book of Proverbs. So now, let's review. First, we'll review the organization of Proverbs. This is preamble, prologue, the body, and the final collections. And let's review the themes of Proverbs. They are wisdom, fear of the Lord, the 2 ways, and Deuteronomistic theology. All right, there we have it. That is the summary of the book of Proverbs. I think the main ideas of Proverbs are fairly easy to understand, but they take a lifetime of pursuing wisdom to deeply grasp and apply. Now, in the next section, we will look at the book of Ecclesiastes, and I hope you'll join us. Thanks for watching.